Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the latest mission from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. So good to have you with us here on this Friday morning, first Friday of September. Hard to believe it's already September, am I right? We're broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at KSC. It is a cloudy and occasionally somewhat drizzly morning here at the KSC press site. Not much of a breeze to speak of at the moment. You can see the American flag not doing much there on the pole. Enough of a breeze, though, to carry the light venting that's happening at the pad off in a horizontal direction. So a little bit more of a breeze out at Pad 39A. And SpaceX is counting down towards the launch of 28 more of its Starlink V2 mini optimized satellites. The company is counting down towards that liftoff at 8:32 a.m. Eastern, 12:32 UTC for our friends around the world. You can see the skies above Florida's Space Coast are not quite as thick with the cumulus clouds when you go to this wide view, and you can get a better context for what's going on out there at the pad. Looking at the satellite view of the Florida Peninsula, you can see there are some thin clouds a little bit higher up, and you can see a couple of them bubbling up right off the coast. However, this rocket is going to be heading at a northeasterly trajectory once it leaves the pad, so it's got pretty clear skies out on its flight path, so that is certainly good news for this mission. As we're getting things going, I want to thank the more than 500 of you who are watching along with us live today. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. I also want to thank our moderators in the chat for helping us out today. Big thanks to Jeff Hansen and Aussie Space Girl for helping us out. And if you do see any of the other mods cruise on in throughout the course of the broadcast, be sure to give them a big old Spaceflight Now hello. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast. Photographer Adam Bernstein is out and about manning the tracking cameras. Michael Kane getting ready to do some still photography as well. John is still off for this launch, but if you're not following our photography team, you can find them at their handles here on X. Adam is at ABurnNYC. Michael is at MD Kane Jr. John is at John Pisani Photo, and be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. We are also on Threads, Facebook, and Blue Sky. The venting you're seeing there from the strong back at Launch Complex 39A is fairly typical for what we're used to seeing out at this particular launch pad. This, of course, is not the so-called big vent that'll be much more pronounced and will come beginning at T-minus 20 minutes and 30 seconds, setting the stage for upper stage LOX load. This and all of our other live launch opportunities are made possible in no small part thanks to our wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Sue Straub, Sulfur for Lunch, Shelly R., Mark Pachotnik, Cumulus Granatus, and many, many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to our member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. Currently 55 minutes and some change on the clock still. For those of you who navigated over to the SpaceX launches page, you may have noticed there's a new mission that popped up on the schedule. That's going to be happening on the 10th as things currently stand. The first batch of the Space Development Agency's transport or Tranche 1 transport layer, part of the SDA's proliferated constellation. Unclear at this moment in time who is the satellite developer. The SDA contracted with three different companies to develop satellites: York Space Systems, Lockheed Martin Space, and Northrop Grumman Strategic Space Systems to collectively build 126 of their, what they describe as optically interconnected space vehicles, or in more plain English, they use laser connectivity, somewhat similar to what the Starlink satellites use. Batch of these are going to be heading into low Earth orbit, again, launching from Vandenberg on the 10th. It's not the next mission coming up for Vandenberg. That's actually coming up tomorrow morning, if all goes well. That is the Starlink 17-9 mission, which will add 24 of SpaceX's Starlink satellites to its low Earth orbit constellation. Back here at home, looking one more mission into the future from the Space Coast. There's a customer mission on deck for SpaceX over at Pad 40, coming up on the evening of September 8th at about 8:02 p.m. Going to be the launch of the SNL satellite heading to geosynchronous transfer orbit. And no, NBC did not commission a comedy satellite to head up into space. SNL in this case stands for the Satellite Nusantara Lima. And apologies to anyone who may be Indonesian and just shuddered at my pronunciation of that, but that is a communications satellite that's being launched on behalf of PSN, an Indonesia-based communications company. So quite busy for SpaceX in the next several days. And of course, in the middle of next week, breaking up the Falcon flights, we've got a launch of a Russian Soyuz spacecraft, or Soyuz rocket, I should say, sending up a Progress spacecraft to the International Space Station to resupply the Russian side of the ISS. That'll be followed days later by a cargo mission heading up to the U.S. side, a Cygnus spacecraft from Northrop Grumman on the NG-23 mission, which is scheduled to launch no earlier than the 15th. So busy times on the Space Coast and beyond, which means now is a great time for you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already here on the YouTube channel. That way you won't be left in the lurch for any part of our coverage, either live or leading up to our live broadcasts. Want to welcome a new channel member, Allison Stevens, or Allison Stevens, I suppose. Let me know in the chat, Allison, if it's Allison or Allison. But thanks for joining with channel membership at the pad leader level. Glad to have you with us. Last little bit of housekeeping as we get the show rolling. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings on in the realm of space or spaceflight, you could use the YouTube Super Chat feature to have your comment or query elevated for discussion. Not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the count, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that, my friends, is always greatly appreciated. Just under 50 minutes to go before the flight of this Falcon 9 rocket, assuming no further adjustment to the T0 time. Today's mission features the flight of a Falcon booster that is going to be taken to the skies for a 27th time. Once upon a time, your 27th flight would have made you the flight leader for the Falcon boosters, but of course, that distinction still belongs to B-1067 in the SpaceX fleet, currently adorned with a little crown icon. Some eagle-eyed viewers also noted that SpaceX added a little crown symbol to its payload-faring flight leader, which has the serial number of 185, which just made its 33rd trip to space and back. It was on the Starlink 10-22 mission. We'll talk a little bit more about B-1069 in just a little bit here. First, want to circle back to our discussion of the weather with a little bit more detail. The 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 70% chance for favorable weather conditions with today's launch attempt. Taking a look back at the turn basin view of Pad 39A. See the main concern for meteorologists as they were looking at the forecast was the potential interference from cumulus clouds. But as we look back to the satellite view, you can see that the clouds, while they are streaming across the Florida Peninsula, let's go ahead and bring that satellite view in, Stephen. The path to the north is mostly clear. You can see some clouds starting to build up off the coast of northeast Florida, a little bit southeast of Georgia. If for whatever reason SpaceX determines that they are unable to launch today, they do have a backup window tomorrow, and the weather improves to 80% chance for favorable conditions. Slightly lighter liftoff winds as well. But yes, when you're looking straight onto the pad from our view here at the press site, you do see that big patch of clouds that's hanging out beyond the pad from this camera's vantage point. So it does look quite ominous. Time now T minus 45 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. Let's take a beat to talk about the countdown timeline for today's mission. These are the milestones ahead for SpaceX with the fueling campaign for its Falcon 9 rocket standing tall at Launch Complex 39A. SpaceX brought its rocket into the launch position yesterday morning, around about 10 o'clock or so. Things really get rocking and rolling here, though, at about the T minus 38-minute mark with the loading or with the call for the start of prop load. SpaceX does its readiness poll electronically, so if it feels like it's in a good position to do so, it can check in with its people a little bit ahead of time. But once the go ahead for fueling is given, tanking of the rocket begins at T minus 35 minutes with the loading of RP1, a rocket grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. And at the same time, liquid oxygen will begin flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. 30 minutes out, first stage helium load begins. It will be true on the second stage a few minutes afterwards. That cryogenic helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. T minus 23 minutes is when the second stage RP1 tank should be at flight levels. And at T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the strong back chill down process gets underway. This is, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, when SpaceX is thermally conditioning the feed lines at the pad prior to second stage LOX load. Here at pad 39A, we'll see this manifest visually as the so-called big vent beginning at about T minus 20 minutes and 30 seconds. The vent lasts 4 minutes in duration and then sets the stage for LOX to begin flowing on board the rocket's upper stage at the 16-minute mark. Moving right along, T minus 7 minutes is when the engine chill begins. SpaceX will flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. That'll help to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. T minus 6 minutes is when the first stage kerosene tank is full. T minus 4.5 minutes is when we'll see the retraction of the strong back. First, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the transporter erector, otherwise referred to as the strong back, will recline away from the Falcon 9 rocket a few degrees. It'll stay in that position until liftoff. Then at that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes out, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. 2 minutes before launch, same is true on the second stage. At that point, the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, when we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown at that point is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. And at the same time, the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will then give their go for launch call. T minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlin 1D engines are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Once again, currently targeting that departure from pad 39A at 8:32 a.m. Eastern, 12:32 UTC. We're coming up in just about 41.5 minutes from now. Taking a look at our live chat, want to thank channel member and moderator Jeff Hansen for a $10 super chat. Thank you, Jeff. Good to see you this morning. Jeff says, go Kennedy, go SpaceX, go Falcon 9, go Starlink, Godspeed 1069, which, if you've just joined us, 1069 is the tail number for the Falcon first stage booster that is flying today's mission. Also want to thank Ethan Wisnowski for a $2 super chat. Thank you, Ethan. Says you're watching at the port. Hopefully some of the clouds that we've seen, a little bit of the sprinkles aren't making things too difficult for you at the port there. But yeah, for those who are planning a trip to Central Florida, or certainly Florida Space Coast in particular, Port Canaveral has a number of good restaurants and spots along the water there that you can stop, grab a bite, and park to see increasingly more space-related activity. Of course, you've got Falcon boosters coming into port quite regularly following their flight and touchdown on the various drone ships. You could also see some activity with Blue Origin's landing vessel named Jacqueline. They do some periodic exercises with that as they're preparing for the upcoming second flight of that rocket, which will send NASA's Escapade satellites on their way to Mars. T minus 38 minutes and counting. At this point, SpaceX should have made the call for the start of prop load. Assuming that go ahead was given, tanking of the Falcon 9 rocket is set to kick off in less than 3 minutes. Time now, T minus 36 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. With today's flight of B-1069, it is one of the missions affecting our Falcon frequent flyers, so worth reminding folks where things stand at present. Gonna have a three-way tie momentarily for second place. Of course, the so-called king or queen of the boosters, however you want to think about it. B-1067 still very firmly in the lead with 30 flights to its name. B-1063, 71, and very soon 1069 will each have 27 missions. B-1077 just made its 23rd trip to space and back, and I believe it'll be joined by another booster very soon. Which one is that? I believe there's an upcoming launch that will put, I think it's going to be the flight of 1078, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't recall offhand which mission that's going to be. But we should have another tie fairly soon. Coming up on T minus 35 minutes and counting. And of course, we will be keeping our eyes peeled for signs of fueling now at this point, since SpaceX no longer announces the start of its tanking campaign with the typical Starlink mission. So we're going to punch in, as you can see here, and where you want to be looking on the rocket is if you see where the strong back starts to taper inward from the base of the strong back on up at that taper point, just a little bit above that on the rocket is where we're going to be watching for some signs of a frost line forming. And that'll be indicative of the super cold densified liquid oxygen flowing on board the rocket's booster. Because the difference of the super cold LOX and the considerably warmer and more humid Florida air, we'll also start to see a little bit of vapor in that part of the vehicle as well. Given the lighting conditions, it may actually be the vapor that we are able to discern first rather than the frost line. Just about 33 and a half minutes before flight, we should start to see some evidence of this in the next minute and a half or so. Very hard to see with this lighting, but you can just start to make out a little bit of vapor in that narrow little corridor between the edge of the rocket and one of the pillars of the crew access tower there. You can see it just bubbling up a little bit, which again does give us good confidence that the Falcon 9 team is tanking this rocket and has set the T0 for 8:32 a.m. Eastern, 12:32 UTC. For those of you just joining us, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starlink 10-57 mission. At this point in the launch campaign, SpaceX is fueling its Falcon 9 rocket, loading RP-1, the fuel, on board the Falcon 9's first and second stage, and the oxidizer, liquid oxygen, on board the rocket's booster. Just past the 30-minute mark, SpaceX is also loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage. It'll do the same on the second stage in the next couple of minutes. I want to thank the more than 1,100 of you who are watching along with us live today. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Worth noting that this booster is set to mark a notable milestone for SpaceX. Good recovery today will mark the 500th Falcon booster landing safely for the company. SpaceX has its drone ship supporting this mission. Just read the instructions. Currently stationed off the coast of South Carolina, just to the southeast of that state. Of course, as the mission name suggests, this is SpaceX preparing to launch another batch of its Starlink V2 Mini optimized satellites. "28 of them are on board this particular Falcon 9 rocket, and this will be the company's 80th mission carrying its Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit just this year. These V2 Mini optimized satellites are considerably lighter than the predecessor V2 Minis. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall effect thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. They were built up in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle, and these will be deployed at about 172 miles or 277 kilometers in altitude at a 53-degree inclination. According to astronomer and expert orbital tracker and friend of the channel, Jonathan McDowell, there are currently a little more than 8,300 Starlink satellites currently in orbit. For some perspective of those 8,300 plus that are currently on orbit, nearly 2,000 of them have been launched this year alone. In fact, with these next 28, that'll bring SpaceX up to 1,998 launched in 2025. Coming up on 24 and a half minutes before flight today, as we're getting ready to see this Falcon first stage booster 1069 make its 27th trip to space and back. Let's go ahead and take a beat and talk about its flight history before it goes and adds number 27 to its list. It began flying back with the launch of a Cargo Dragon mission, CRS-24, on December 21st of 2021. That mission was followed by its first Starlink flight, Starlink 4-23, on August 28th, 2022. Eutelsat's Hotbird 13F communication satellite followed that. And up next was another communications constellation satellite bunch for OneWeb this time. Depending on the nomenclature that you use, from OneWeb's perspective, this was their 15th launch for its constellation for SpaceX. It was the first batch of OneWeb satellites that it had launched. These satellites are manufactured actually not too far away from the Kennedy Space Center at the now former Airbus OneWeb Satellites facility on Merritt Island at Exploration Park. Now that facility is just an Airbus facility where they still manufacture the Aero satellite bus. Similar to what OneWeb used, a very similar production line, but able to go to other customers as well beyond OneWeb. Up next, Starlink 5-3 on February 2nd of 2023. And you had SES satellites 18 and 19 lifting off on March 17th. A string of Starlinks came after this, and it was all Starlinks all the time that bring us up to the present. So we'll speed run this a little bit. Starlink 5-7 on May 4th, 5-12 on June 23rd, 6-9 on August 11th, 6-19 on September 30th, 6-28 on November 18th, 6-36 on December 29th. Coming into last year, 6-39 on February 25th, 6-47 on April 5th, 6-57 May 6th, 10-1 on June 8th. Turn the page. 10-9 on July 27th, 8-10 on August 31st, 10-8 on October 26th, 6-66 on November 21st, 12-3 on February 4th, coming into this year, 12-21 on March 13th, 6-74 on April 25th, 12-22 on May 24th, almost caught up, 10-23 on June 23rd, and most recently 10-29 on July 30th. Now we're just 21 minutes and counting away from flight number 27, Starlink 10-57. And starting right now is the beginning of the chill down sequence for the feed lines there at the pad. We'll see this manifest as the so-called big vent in about 10 seconds. And there you see the vent beginning right on time. Again, this vent will last roughly 4 minutes in duration, setting the stage for liquid oxygen to flow on board the rocket's upper stage, beginning at the 16-minute mark. 18 minutes and counting. About a minute and a half left before this event wraps up. Taking a look at our live chat here, I want to thank channel member Chuck Close for a very generous $25 super chat. Really appreciate that, Chuck. Good to see you this morning. Hopefully, folks in our audience have some fun plans for the first full weekend in September. Of course, if you'd like some of that planning to include a Falcon 9 rocket launch, we do have one more for you coming up tomorrow morning. The planned flight of Starlink 17-9 from Vandenberg Space Force Base out in California. That's a late afternoon launch for folks out in the Golden State. Window opening up at 4:52 p.m. Pacific, 7:52 p.m. Eastern, 23:52 UTC for those around the world. Sixteen and a half minutes on the clock. The big vent is now tapering off. Second stage LOX load is about to begin. Also, I was remiss in my opening remarks to not mention our friends P. Carson's with Max Q Productions, as well as Chuck and Jen Briggs, who are helping to support our coverage of today's mission. Looking live now from Chuck and Jen's vantage point up in Titusville. Just about 15 minutes remaining on the countdown today. Starlink 10-57 mission represents SpaceX's 528th Falcon 9 rocket launch to date, the 111th of the year so far. The company is still aiming for a total of 170 launches, at least, by year's end. Taking a peek back at our live chat here, I want to thank K2 Hat for a $5 super chat, who says, great coverage as always. Good morning from Mico, Florida. Good morning to all of our friends and viewers down in the Mico area. Also, thanks to Norman Reitzel for a $10 super chat, one of our channel members. Thank you, Norman. Who says, just to think, only a few years ago, people knew that landing a booster was impossible. And here SpaceX now stands on the cusp of launching and landing what would be its 500th successful booster landing to date, if all goes well. And as we're getting ready to see the flight of B-1069 before it makes its attempt to land for SpaceX's 500th time, let's go ahead and talk about the workhorse vehicle for the company, the Falcon 9, of course. Rocket stands 70 meters or 229 feet in height and has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Majority of that is made up by the rocket's booster. It has 9 Merlin engines, as you can see on the image on the right-hand side of your screen, which gives the rocket its name. The booster burns a combination of RP1, a rocket-grade kerosene, and liquid oxygen, producing about 1.7 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Again, today SpaceX is using its vessel called Just Read the Instructions for this recovery effort. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In that image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins currently tucked into the body of the rocket right now in the live image. These grid fins are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back to the atmosphere, tail first like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the vehicle's second stage, and at first stage main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Also, the second stage engine nozzle is housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until the point of stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVac engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight to place the 28 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. Like with the first stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 burns the same prop mix, but is RP1 and LOX. It will ignite for a third time after deploying the Starlink satellites for a deorbit burn. That'll help to drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere where it will burn up and eliminate the risk of any unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings currently encapsulating these Starlink satellites. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material and stand 13.1 meters or 43 feet in height and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. 10 minutes on the clock. 3 minutes from now, SpaceX will conduct the engine chill sequence, flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect its engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. Looks like we got a few folks out here on the press lawn this morning, getting ready to check out the flight of the Falcon 9 rocket set to depart Pad 39A in just about 9 minutes from now. Just about 8 minutes to go before the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket. Taking a look back at our live chat, I want to thank the more than 2,600 of you who are watching along with us live today. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. And for those wanting a better idea about where this Falcon 9 is going to be heading once it leaves the pad, let's discuss that now and talk a little trajectory, shall we? Upon departure from historic Launch Complex 39A, the Falcon 9 rocket is going to be heading on a northeasterly trajectory along the east coast of the U.S. Following stage separation, the first stage booster, B-1069, will target a landing on the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. As a reminder, this is set to be SpaceX's 500th successful booster landing if all goes well today. Once down on the drone ship, that vessel will be brought back through Port Canaveral and the booster offloaded right across from the little joint called Gators Dockside. On this mission, though, following the payload fairing jettison, those fairing halves will also make their way down to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, a little bit further downrange where the booster lands on the drone ship. SpaceX is working towards certifying both its first stage boosters and fairing halves for up to 40 flights apiece. Once down in the water, making their splashdown under the support of parachutes, SpaceX will bring the fairing halves on board one of its recovery vessels and, like with the booster, bring them through Port Canaveral onto their Hangar X site here at the Kennedy Space Center. And then they will be examined, refurbished, and turned around for future missions. Coming up on 5 minutes before flight, the first stage RP-1 tank should be full at this point in the countdown. We're coming up on our pad level views and mission audio coming down from SpaceX as well. Expecting that momentarily.
Tanks are pressing for strong back retract.
And as you just heard, we are getting that mission audio now. And with that call, SpaceX is preparing for the retraction of its strong back. First, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the large support structure, referred to as the strong back or the transporter erector, that'll recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It'll stay in that position until liftoff.
Strong back retract.
Getting a close-up view of those payload fairings and a nice little bird's eye view of a lot of the activity. Yep. Hopefully we'll get that shot back again at some point in the broadcast. But you could see lots of activity happening there at pad 39A, which you can always keep a distant view of through our 24/7 live stream Launchpad Live. SpaceX working on their Starship launch and catch tower there at the pad. Additionally, SpaceX is looking to add a landing pad to LC-39A as well, since it will soon, as of the end of this year, no longer have access to either landing zones 1 or 2 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Earlier this week, both the FAA and the Department of the Air Force gave SpaceX the green light to ramp up the number of launches at pad 40 up to 120 annually and construct a landing zone there.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Good call for fueling with the booster's liquid oxygen tank now full. Turn now to the second stage, and we should hear a similar call coming up in the next about 30 seconds.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
With that call, the Falcon 9 rocket is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. You're seeing the ground gas closeouts now as well. SpaceX releasing the remaining liquid oxygen from the feed lines there at the pad.
Ground gas closeouts.
One minute and counting.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And we're coming up on the SpaceX launch director now giving their go for launch call. Coming in the next few seconds.
LD go for launch.
And with that good go for launch, just a little more than 30 seconds away from the flight of this Falcon 9 rocket. "15 seconds. And here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 10-57 mission. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower.
Power and telemetry nominal.
Coming up on 1 minute into flight. So far, all going well with this Falcon 9 rocket launch.
Vehicle is supersonic.
Traveling faster than the speed of sound on this Friday morning. Coming up on max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle, and a nice little ring there.
Max Q.
Good call for max Q. Coming up on MVAC chill, the thermal conditioning of the upper stage engine.
MVAC chill is underway.
With that good confirmation there, SpaceX is coming up on a few events in fairly rapid succession. Next, we'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation and then the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage. We're just about 10 seconds to MECO. MECO, stage separation.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
All good calls, good onboard camera visuals, and good tracking work by the team all the way uphill. Coming up on 3 minutes into this flight, fairing separation is imminent. There go the fairing halves in the big
Fairing
box.
separation confirmed.
Following atmospheric reentry, those fairing halves will make their final splashdown in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. Now, a little more than 3.5 minutes into this mission, coming up next will be the start of the 3-engine entry burn. It's coming up beginning about T plus 6 minutes and 11 seconds into this flight. The entry burn will last a little less than 30 seconds in total. You can see with the telemetry data in the middle of the two onboard camera views, the booster B1069 hasn't quite reached its peak altitude in today's flight just yet, but it is quickly approaching that milestone. Looks like it's going to top out right about 115 kilometers, may eke out 116, but looks like 115 is going to be our grand total for the day. Now beginning to make its descent towards the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions, positioned to the southeast of South Carolina. Five minutes into the flight in real time. We're just about a minute away from the start of the entry burn here. Our tracking cameras are scanning the skies, but given the lighting conditions, the amount of clouds, it's going to be quite a challenging thing to catch a ground level view of the entry burn, but we'll continue to keep monitoring. And if we are able to bring you even just a glimpse, we'll pop back over to Pete's camera. Coming up on 6 minutes into the flight, just about 10 seconds away from the start of the entry burn now.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Entry burn starting in real time.
Stage 1 entry burn startup. Stage 1 entry burn shut down. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . .
And with the conclusion of that entry burn, SpaceX is now set up for the start of its landing burn as the company attempts its 500th good landing to date. That will use just the single engine in the center of the Falcon booster. Expect that to kick on right about T plus 8 minutes into the mission.
Stage 1 transonic.
First stage now traveling below the speed of sound, coming up on the start of the landing burn in just about 10 seconds.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Terminal guidance.
Landing leg deployed. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
And a good confirmation of a touchdown, the 500th time that SpaceX has successfully landed one of its Falcon boosters.
MVAC shutdown.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And with a good confirmation of a nominal orbit insertion, at this point, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 will continue to coast until about T plus 54 minutes and 56 seconds. There will then be a brief 1-second burn of the upper stage engine, setting up the Starlink satellites to deploy at T plus 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 18 seconds post liftoff. And with a good liftoff and landing of the first stage booster, we're coming up to our near the end of our show. We're getting our launch replays ready for you. But before we hit that, want to go to first some comments from our audience. Also want to thank Mark Otto for being with us today. Just noticing that he joined us at some point during the broadcast. Appreciate you, Mark, as always. Want to thank Retrobit for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that. Also, thanks to Sulfur for Lunch. It's been a member with us now for 13 months at the mission specialist level. Sulfur says, another month to the collection. Always a joy to be here. Joy to have you, Sulfur. Thanks as well to Norman Reitzel for another $20 super chat. Really appreciate support at that level, Norman. Offering some thoughts on how SpaceX could get some more performance potentially out of its Falcon engines. Our thanks to friend of the channel and editor of Talk of Titusville, Charles Boyer, with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Charles. Who says, thank you as always, Will and team. those wanting another good local source of information about what's going on here on the Space Coast, check out Talk of Titusville at their website, talkoftitusville.com. Super easy. Also, thanks to JB Boating for a $5 super chat. Thank you, JB, for your support today. And a thanks as well to Donald Evans, DJE, for a $2 super chat. Thank you, Donald. As we get those replays ready for you, let's check in with our mission stats now as they currently stand. Today's flight marked the 27th trip to space and back for beat 1069. This was SpaceX's 528th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 111th of the year so far. This was the company's 463rd Falcon booster reflight, the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 157th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 212th orbital flight from Pad 39A, and the 276th overall orbital launch from this pad as well. Correction, it was actually the 159th orbital launch for SpaceX in that 365-day stat. Moving on to some recoveries, this was the 135th good landing on the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. This was SpaceX's 406th drone ship landing, and as we've been talking about throughout the morning, the 500th booster landing for SpaceX as well. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 76th orbital launch from Florida so far this year, the 117th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 129th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company, and the 200th orbital launch attempt around the world. There have been 5 orbital failures so far on the year. Here is where our pie chart now currently stands. As more orbital launch providers come into the marketplace, this pie chart's getting increasingly crowded, which is both a good and a bit of a problem to have. Obviously, it's getting a little cramped with all the 1%ers up there. May have to figure out another way to make this a little bit more or less visually clustered. We'll brainstorm some ideas behind the scenes. In the meantime, though, we've got our launch replays ready for you now, and let's kick things off with the press site fixed view from our Adam Bernstein. Moving on to the wide view now. Turning now to the turn basin. out of Pete Carson's tracker in the south. Moving on to the wide tracker now. And finally back to Adam's tracker. And with that good compilation of replays now done and dusted, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our live launch coverage this morning. Big thanks to our friends Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions and to Chuck and Jen Briggs for helping us out today with those great tracking views. Big thanks as well to our moderators in the live chat, to Jeff Hansen, Mark Otto, and Aussie Space Girl. Want to thank our photographers here at the press site, both Michael Kane and Adam Bernstein. Got some great photos of Liftoff, which we'll be sharing on our social channels as well. Be sure to follow them, though, at their handles on X. You can find them at MD Kane Jr. for Michael, Aburn NYC for Adam, and John will be back before you know it. Also, be sure to follow Spaceflight now if you're not following us already on either X, Threads, Facebook, or Blue Sky. We've got one more launch to kick things off for the weekend. Coming up tomorrow with the launch of the Starlink 17-9 mission. Going to go back to an afternoon flight from Vandenberg Space Force Base. And then we'll see you we'll see you on Monday evening back here for the next launch at the Cape. You can always keep tabs on Pad 39A and things down at Starbase by heading over to our 24/7 live stream, Launchpad Live. So be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon as well so you're notified when we start our next dedicated live stream for a launch. I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of today's broadcast. Most importantly, though, I want to thank you for wherever you've been watching from. We certainly appreciate your time and attention and look forward to welcoming you back in when next we begin another live stream. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I am Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.